You may love a thing that I detest, bagpipes, long hikes, sweater vests. Our interests are all varying, it's fun to be contrarian. But I'll try things that you all love, to see if I can rise above. But maybe there's a chance that I just won't. So in that case, don't mind if I don't.
Welcome to Don't Mind If I Don't. Hey, I'm your host, Aaron Gold. This is the show where I don't like things, and then fans and experts of those things convince me that I'm wrong. Now, this might surprise some of you, but complaining is not my full-time job. I am also an actor. One who has dealt with everything from newbies forgetting their lines to the theater people who take it way too seriously. Speaking of, let's talk Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, or as he's more commonly known, Billiam Shakerman, is hailed as the greatest playwright to have ever play-written, with his work still being performed, celebrated, and overanalyzed by people trying to out-snob each other for over 400 years. His comedies and tragedies, when performed correctly, in iambic pentameter, did they flow with royalties to Yoda ode. See? Ridiculous! But what bugs me most, though, is the fandom. Anyone claiming Romeo and Juliet is the greatest love story ever either hasn't read it or thinks two children getting married and having both their families killed is couple goals. I personally think it's lazy story writing when most of the drama could be eliminated by the characters just not keeping inane secrets from each other. And I know that wipes out the majority of the programming on the CW, but I said what I said. It's just so full of bad choices. Oh, I think my uncle killed my dad to bang my mom. Saith unto me, should I taketh action? Shall I telleth the royal guard? Nah, I'll just poison people by pouring shit in their ears? Stupid. Now, admittedly, I do have a Shakespeare tattoo. After years of my mom shoving Bilbo Shake Shack down my throat, it was the first line of his that actually resonated with me. Duke Dame, Duke Dame, Duke Dame, which is spoken by Jacques the Clown in As You Like It, roughly translating to me, my fools. I got it to honor my dead mom, show my desire to be surrounded by funny people, and because I thought making both the drama masks comedy would be cool. Though I'm betting you're just noticing they're both comedy now, so swing and a miss past me. Everything on this show gets rated on a scale of 0, my ambivalence, to -10, my blood-curdling hatred. Shakespeare clocks in at a -5. Yes, you must honor the classics and know where you came from and blah, blah, blah. This shit is boring and ham-fisted. Oh, let me monologue to the audience all my thoughts and feelings, because apparently things like subtlety and nuance weren't invented for another 100 years. But I digress. This show exists because I know I'm wrong and I want to learn. So let's see if I can't get into Shakespeare. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, author of 14 books, both fiction and non, Christine Stoddard. Hello, Christine.
Hi, boyfriend.
Hello. Now, you've written 14 books that have been printed out. My question to you is, why do you hate the environment?
I was going to say, one of them's an ebook.
13 books that just, you're a tree slaughterer.
Yeah, I'm sorry, trees.
Don't apologize to me. Don't apologize to trees.
There are no trees here.
You know, yeah, and I wonder why that is. Joining us is a professor of theater and media culture, a producer for independent theater for decades, and an on-air personality for ACW TV. He has directed a third of Shakespeare's canon. Jay Michaels is here. Also joining us, a Broadway performer / writer, and the first person in history nominated for a major award for both playing and directing Hamlet for a theatrical production. I said theatrical weird, but I'm going to keep going. She has taught at NYU Tish's School of the Arts and made her Shakespeare debut when she was 8 years old. Ashley Griffin is also here.
Hey.
Thank you both for joining us.
Glad to be here. This is wonderful. Thank you for having us.
Aw, shucks. Now, you guys have essentially dedicated your lives to Shakespeare. My first question is, what's your favorite Marvel movie?
Anything with Loki.
Good answer.
The Spider-Man movies.
Are you talking Into the Spider-Verse, or are you talking the third one of the Tom Holland?
Brilliant. The third of the Tom Hollands
So
made
good.
me cry. It was absolutely marvelous.
I'm sorry, viewers. This is just going to be the talk now.
No,
My
Shakespeare.
favorite.
Shakespeare.
Well, actually, there's a lot.
Shakespeare.
I was actually going to say there's actually an enormous amount of mythology in Shakespeare.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but not with Captain America.
There you have a point.
Well, that's another
Okay,
discussion.
that's
of
1 point
myths.
for me.
Yeah.
Right, at least. With so many stories about tricking women into marrying men, do we have Shakespeare to thank for patriarchy?
Oh, well, hey, what about All's Well That Ends Well, where a woman tricks a man into marrying her?
Okay, so that's one versus, I'm going to assume, half the catalog?
Well, there's
Canon.
Okay, all right.
I mean, there's actually an enormous number of stories that Shakespeare deals with that deal with gender in a really interesting and in a really phenomenal way that asks a lot of really great questions and is not nearly as linear or straightforward as most people
He
think.
also levels the scales because you might have your romantic comedies, but then you also have your Lady Macbeth. You also have your Portia in Merchant of Venice. You have these very powerful women characters.
Well, okay, I'm not an expert on Shakespeare like you guys, but I did read Hamlet, and I'm pretty sure things don't go so great for Ophelia in there.
Well, things don't go so great for like anyone.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
all die at the end. Spoiler alert. The queen is the whole focal point, really, when you look at it. Was she complicit in the crime? Was she part of things? She seems to be the focal point. So again, another strong female character.
And another strong reason to hate women. Gotcha, Jay. Succinctly, what do you love about Shakespeare?
Shakespeare is the original badass.
Ooh.
Shakespeare, every one of his plays is subversive. Every one of his plays socks it to the man. He has strong female characters. He has given us every plot possible, and we have culled everything from Lion King to West Side Story from his works. The Shakespeare conspiracy is part of this because of it.
Oh no!
Oh,
no.
let's not go there.
No, we actually are going to go
Good,
there.
good. I'll
The
talk for
Shakespeare
hours.
conspiracy is that he did not write all of his plays.
That is correct. That is correct.
Now, in this theory, did other people write plays normally, and then he just threw in some like vows and arts? Like, was
There's the
to
group
be or
theory.
not to be originally just what if?
Actually, it's funny you say that. There
Yeah,
are
that's a
two
whole other-
versions of Hamlet where it's to be or not to be. Is
that
that
all?
it?
Or
Is that all?
I think it's
Okay.
is that all.
There's 3 versions.
No.
Ha-ha!
Well, no, that gets into complications with like if you were an actor in one of Shakespeare's original plays, you wouldn't get the entire script. You would get your role written out. And so in order to collect the plays originally, they kind of had to go to all the actors and be like, hey, tell us what you remember from what you did.
Wow.
And put it together. So there are bad versions of plays out there that are sort of culled from people's not always accurate memories. And then at some point they went around and they actually found like all the written drafts and they put that together to be the folio
That's
version
why
that we
there's
use
the
today.
controversy, because sometimes authors wanted to make money and Shakespeare's name was prominent. So they said, here's a play called Fred, and it's written by William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And they would sell it as his play. There was no
Wait,
copyright.
Shakespeare
then.
did Fred?
Yeah.
That's right.
I know. it's
And
your
the musical.
favorite.
But there was no copyright. So everyone could just claim whatever, because a play was no different than a table. You made a table, you sold it. You wrote a play, you sold it.
How did his name then stay on if copyright was not a
Honestly,
thing?
here's this is very oversimplifying it, but here's
Please do. Oh, my favorite.
real
Baby
oversimplification.
steps.
A lot of where the conspiracy comes from is because there are a lot of people that feel that Shakespeare, who didn't have an extraordinary education, couldn't have written all of the plays that he did, because the level of knowledge that you would have to have about everything from shipbuilding to sailing to Latin to mythology.
Every language that
Yeah.
they had at that time as well.
And it's actually one of the reasons that, I mean, who knows? If I'm proven wrong, great. But I personally don't hold to the conspiracies. I think that Shakespeare wrote it because, I don't know, I personally think it can be a little elitist to say you have to have a certain level of education.
Yeah.
That's why there is this conspiracy, because they can't believe
Yeah.
that a regular person could have such knowledge.
Yeah.
That does endear him to me somewhat.
I love Shakespeare because Shakespeare deals with the human condition in a way that is completely unique in human existence. And I think that there is a lot of elitism about Shakespeare, and there are some barriers because obviously, you know, he was writing in the 1500s, very early 1600s, and I was very fortunate that I got to encounter Shakespeare for the first time as a child. And so I never knew that he was somebody to be afraid of or put on a pedestal. And I think that that's something that's been denied to a lot of people because of the gatekeeping and the elitism around it. And so that's why I love Shakespeare.
Well, I get being intimidated by it, but you keep saying being afraid. And also, like, have you looked at the guy? I mean, he looks like a pervert. He does.
Have you looked at everyone from that time period?
I haven't gotten all the way through yet, but I've started.
Well,
Also, I don't think everyone at that time period wrote about 14-year-olds getting married.
Oh, yeah.
How was his social life?
Well, no,
that
was
normal
common.
at that point.
That was completely
the proper
normal.
age.
Gross.
Because
And also, women were not allowed to perform. Actually, those young women were played by young boys.
Yeah. So there's all these other levels. So there's a lot of stories in his comedies about women disguising themselves as men. And there's actually.
So it was men disguising themselves as women
disguising
to disguise
themselves
themselves.
Exactly.
There's a brilliant movie that was a play first called Stage Beauty with Billy Crudup and Claire Danes that talks about it's a slightly fictionalized account of the last man to play women's roles on stage and the first woman to play women's roles. And it's brilliant.
I've seen that one.
It's brilliant. I highly
That's
recommend
very
it.
good.
Yeah.
Billy
You
Cripps
liked
amazing.
it?
Yeah. What's this?
He was clairvoyant, whereas any author of that time period was not. He understood who was, shall we say, the villain of society at that point, but he was subversive in making sure they were also the hero. Back then, racism was the norm. You simply had to be racist, but his...
Yeah, can you imagine?
But like his Othello is a valiant soul, and yet he is African-American. Well, he's not African-American. He's African.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
That wasn't an American then.
they made him the villain.
There was not a colonized America.
Thank you. Yep, that is true. Whoopsie.
They made him the villain, but he was not necessarily. They made him die because he did villainous things, but he was not the villain. The great monologue of Shylock, "Hath not a Jew eyes, hands, senses, dimensions." Again, back then, the Jew was simply the moneylender and the villain, and that's it. But Shakespeare, deep down, whoever Shakespeare is, knew that not everyone's going to stay that way forever, and that eventually the tide would turn. And that's why his plays still exist.
Shylock, that was Merchant of Venice, right?
Yes.
I've seen that version where we were as Jews, so perfectly represented by Al Pacino. And
You mean around the nose? Yeah, that's excellent.
Things
Yes.
don't go so great for Shylock in that story, huh?
No, it does not.
And
But
it's
there
kinda
is
hosted
that
by his own
monologue.
petard there.
Yes, completely. But he is not killed. He is not killed. It sounds funny to say this. The fact that he did not die in the way they built the plays in the Renaissance era does not make him the full villain. Everyone is hoisted by their own petard, as it says in Hamlet, and they die. Every character that does wrong dies. He does not. That's why that play is considered a comedy. Because the word comedy didn't mean
Messed
funny
up sense
back
of
then.
humor. Oh.
English back then had a very Scottish tint to it. So it wasn't a comedy, it was a comedy. And so if you
Don't
weren't,
like that.
if you didn't have a tragedy, which meant sacrifice, you did a comedy or common day, which was a comedy. That's why we have sitcoms. Common Day is just an ongoing funny story.
I hope you can hear how hard I'm blinking.
Tragedy ends in the tragic fall of the main character because of a personal fault. A comedy ends in a wedding, and a romance falls somewhere in between the two. And a history is based on. That's what
romance doesn't necessarily end in a marriage.
Well, no, but a romance in Shakespeare's day did not end as a tragedy, but it didn't end in a wedding. Like literally, a comedy meant it ended in a wedding, and a history was based on a historical event. But speaking of subverting tropes, I mean, Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare didn't invent that story. That was a common story, and the versions of Romeo and Juliet that existed previous to that had a very different message. It was about kids are stupid. You should listen to your parents. Like really, it's like you're idiots. You should have listened to your parents, and that's why you died. And the fact that Shakespeare twisted it to be like, no, we're not treating our young people right, and we're not listening to them, and that's what's going to end in horrible tragedy. And we maybe need to rethink our relationship to our children.
That's the clairvoyance I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The messages now can be digested from what he wrote then.
Well, hold on. So Romeo and Juliet existed before Shakespeare.
Most of Shakespeare's plays existed before him. He was
What?
just in the same way that you have like 5 million adaptations of Snow White. You had
ancient
5
Greek,
yeah.
ancient Roman, pagan mythology. These are all stories that were twisted into things. Midsummer Night's Dream is a perfect example because it is the pagan myths, is these fairy creatures that live in the forest. He did not make that up.
Yeah.
I knew he was drawing on like history and mythology, but I thought that like he had an original bone in his fucking body.
Richard II, which I adore, was written to be a subversive, and it was actually a very dangerous play for him to write commentary on what was going on with Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I didn't have an heir. She had never had children. And she had a lot of advisors around her that people thought were giving her terrible advice. And Richard II was a historical story about obviously one of her ancestors, Richard II, who was deposed as king. And then that's where we get all the Henry kings from, is because they literally forced him off the throne and took the crown. And it then caused all these questions about like, well, what do we have to say about divine right of kings if we can just take it away? And Queen Elizabeth famously walked out of the first performance livid and said, "Know you not that I am Richard II."
That's why I say Shakespeare's the original badass.
Yeah.
Every play has a particular story in there. Every play has a motivation in there. The people understood it. The elite did not.
Yeah.
Did people talk like that then, or did he just really gussy up that
Jazz it
language?
up.
They did.
It's a little both.
Zhuzh it?
Yeah.
It's a little both. They did speak that way, but the Bible was the prevailing piece of literature at that point, and the Bible obviously uses the same prose. And so, to respectfully speaking, Shakespeare had the same thing. People did speak that way, but it was heightened for his work. And also, it's poetic works. His works are all poetic works. They're in iambic pentameter. They're in a rhyme. They're in a particular meter. And so he had, in some cases, you even have nair, like N-E''er, just so it.
Thing?
You need some of that.
No, that's
Okay.
anyway.
Let's not body shame me.
But this way it goes into proper meter. This way it goes into proper rhythm. So he heightened the language, but yes, they spoke in that way back then.
Well, and a lot of the words that sound weird to us today are the same as like when we say couldn't, it's could not. And they were forcing 2 words together that we just don't happen to do. But if you listen to them and just look at them, it's like, oh, it's 2 words with an apostrophe in
Well,
between.
I also know that's how we got good morning, because that was originally God be with you this morning.
Oh, that's too long.
The other most popular form of entertainment in Shakespeare's day was bear baiting, which is where they got a starving bear in like a bear pit, and they'd put an animal in there to fight it, and they'd see which one won.
That's not what I thought bear baiting was, but it's better.
well,
All right.
Good enough.
And
Yeah.
one of my favorite teachers of all time said that, Shakespeare won in terms of popularity against bear baiting, not because everybody was like, elite and erudite, but because he was raunchier and he was more violent.
Every character, every Shakespeare play has a sexual monologue somewhere.
Yep.
The nurse in Romeo and Juliet compares Juliet tripping and falling to laying on her back while having sexual things happen. So there are so many.
You can say sex.
I mentioned this before we started rolling. Shakespeare created every curse word that we have today.
And a lot of sexual innuendos.
Okay.
All the sexual innuendos.
Let's talk about that. You said including the worst one?
Yes. The most offensive. I'll say that one. There are worse, but the most
Well,
offensive.
I would like to know which one you think it is.
It's in Hamlet.
Yeah, before the player scene, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
him and Ophelia.
Are we talking about the C word?
There
Yeah.
you go.
It's-
There you go.
It's
Chocolate.
Right. He's messing with Ophelia and says, "Lady, may I lie in your lap?" And then there's some response. And then he says, "What, you think I meant country matters?"
Laid country matters in maids' laps
Yeah.
have become 2 or 3
Yep.
offensive
Yeah.
phrases.
Wow.
And just plain country matters meant, what the country folk were doing for fun, but with a specific emphasis on the first 4 letters of that word.
Titus Andronicus is the original slasher film.
Oh, yeah.
Every Shakespeare play had something in it to make the groundlings, the regular audience, the cheap seats, have a wonderful time. And they would laugh. And many times the royalty didn't get it, but the regular folk did. That's why he was also beloved by everyone.
And speaking of the groundlings, I mean, they had food there were orange sellers. They had food. If they didn't like you, they'd throw food at you. I mean...
Shakespeare was the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Okay, that I was in a Rocky Horror Cast for many years.
Cool.
Who'd you play?
The first year I was Brad, and then the
Nice.
last 3 years I was Frankenfurter. But enough about how broken my brain is. When I think Shakespeare, I think of like a lot of ruffly clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Was that of the time, or was that another thing he was just joking
That was usually what we see usually in paintings and things like that. That's pretty much their dress outfits.
Okay.
The versions of it that the working folk wore were similar, but they didn't have the ruffs. I
Yes.
loved the ruffle shirts.
Men's legs were the big fashion statement. I mean, just like, women today would, show off our legs, but at the time, men showing off their legs, that was the big...
That was an insult, actually. In Hamlet and in several plays, there were moments where they say incredibly weak hams, meaning hamstrings, meaning they had bad legs.
Yeah.
So again,
Wow.
there were
Legs.
insults everywhere.
Shakespeare
abounding.
invented body shaming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well,
Well, speaking of imposing standards, I know that one big issue you have with Shakespeare culture is elitism.
Yeah.
So did you want to ask anything about that
Yeah.
specifically?
What's wrong with you?
I go back. The elite of that time period could not have a common man or common person write these amazing works. So they took them. And that has continued. That's why they're imposed in colleges the way they are. That's why academia treats Shakespeare like you're reading the Bible in its original Aramaic. That's why
Yeah.
they push it that way, because they want to make it seem religious, powerful, intellectual. If Shakespeare was alive today, he'd be writing Lifetime original movies, he'd be writing horror movies, he'd be writing for Vin Diesel, and he'd be writing porn.
Yeah.
That would be it. If you look at his works from the material, from
Yeah.
the stories, from the characters, it is as accessible as a Marvel movie or as any of the Fast and Furious films.
We also got this big turn where Shakespeare is primarily now studied in English classes.
Yes.
And it's not meant to be, and I'm not saying it's not great literature, it is, but Shakespeare's plays were meant to be experienced as plays. And it would be, I mean, if you took a Marvel movie and you started studying it in a literature class, like it would...
if they somehow made books out of these comic type things. Yeah.
Well, no,
Preposterous.
Well, no, I'm saying like if somebody printed out the screenplay for a Marvel movie and you had to analyze it in an English class, it would be the most boring thing you've ever done.
That's why
Well-
Shakespeare is meant to be seen.
Yes.
To read it. Think of every one of his prologues. All his prologues are not, just previously on Breaking Bad. No, each one of his prologues is, hello, audience. This is what's going to happen. This one's going to die. You're going to enjoy this, and go.
It seems like the worst thing about Shakespeare is very similar to the worst thing about most things. It's the fandom. In terms of like how bad the fandom of things can be,
Yeah.
you were kept from fully learning this in school.
I was left with more time and my teacher was like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, honestly, I would really love to work on some Hamlet. And he's like, well, Ophelia stuff's not great to bring in for auditions. I'm like, no, I know and I agree, but no, I don't mean Ophelia, although I love Ophelia and would love to play Ophelia. I'm like, I mean Hamlet. And they wouldn't let me do it and wouldn't let me do it. And finally I pushed it and was like, why? And they're like, well, you're a girl, you never play it. What's the point?
That is absolute garbage. Joseph Papp at the Public Theater had 2 productions with female Hamlets. Sarah Bernhardt, the great actress of the 19th century, played Hamlet. Hamlet is one of those shows that it is played backwards and forwards in different ways.
In my production, I played Hamlet, and the idea was that Hamlet was a woman who'd been raised as a man for succession purposes. And in our production, Ophelia was a man who'd been bullied his whole life for being too sensitive. Men and boys that were like, I'm Ophelia, and I never realized it. And you had women that were like, I'm Hamlet, and I never realized it. And the whole point of the production ultimately was like, we're all Hamlet and we're all Ophelia. And I find it really ironic that I was shut down so often and I couldn't even explore the text in class because I was a girl.
I want to go back to iambic pentameter.
Yes.
So that is, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's 5.
It's
to
5.
be or not to be, that is the question. It's 5.
It's da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's a poetic structure. So in the same way that you would write, a haiku or something like that, and there's a structure to it, it's a way of structuring and writing poetry. So basically it's...
And all of Shakespeare's works.
Not all of it.
Okay.
So Shakespeare has poetry and prose. And the poetic things are in iambic pentameter and the prose are not. And it was, again, it's similar to writing a rap or having, song lyrics where things hit in more of a way, and there's a rhyme scheme to it as well. So it was just a poetic structure that they used for a lot of their playwriting.
It was also a command. You had to write in some sort of lyrical way, because back then, if you just simply spoke, you would be considered lying. That's why women were not on stage, because if a woman turned to a man and said, "I love you," and this wasn't her husband, then she is essentially doing something brazen. But if you sang, because in religious circumstances you are reciting, and so if it is in a certain rhythm, then you're not speaking, you're singing, and you're not breaking any law.
It's actually one of the things I find so beautiful about the meeting scene between Romeo and Juliet. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, they complete a sonnet together. Romeo like throws out his like line that's like his line for getting the girls, and Juliet picks it up, and then he picks it up, and by the end of that scene, it is a complete sonnet.
It's hard to be grumpy about something when you guys are making good points.
Well, see,
I like that word.
Well, see,
Yes.
this is the thing that frustrates me so much.
The show a little.
Well, no, but this is the thing that frustrates me so much is I love this and I find it so fun, and it's like going on a little treasure hunt to learn these things. But because we're centuries removed, we do have to learn these things, and all the things that we're sharing, you know, a teacher shared with us. And if you don't have a teacher, like I said, that's like going to open the door for you, but instead is like, well, if you don't get this, you're stupid, then it's not only making you feel stupid and feel like, why would I ever want to like this because just this door is shut, but it's you're missing out on all these wonderful opportunities to have fun with something and to enjoy it and to discover these little things.
Also because you don't take it so goddamn
That's exactly
seriously.
right. And his messages continue to this day because of it.
Yeah.
If we live those messages, then Shakespeare is accessible. The Lion King is based
Hamlet.
on Hamlet.
It's 100% Hamlet.
West Side Story is based on Romeo and Juliet. The Boys from Syracuse is based on the Comedy of Errors. When I read Hamlet,
Yeah.
when I watched it, when I felt it, when I was part of it, couldn't get enough
Well,
of
and
it.
that's an interesting thing with performers with Shakespeare too, is so much of it is just like, if you understand what you're saying, the audience will understand what you're saying. You don't have to know every single word.
When you put it in modern, no audience member of any of the shows I did ever came to me and said, I didn't understand. What were they talking about?
I did see Shakespeare in the Park with Midsummer Night's Dream a few years ago, and
Yeah.
I
Gorgeous
was able to
production.
follow that,
Right.
and I found myself laughing. And
Well, that's
Of course.
Well, that's the
Of
big.
course.
That's the other place where elitism comes in, is when you get artistic directors and directors that are like, well, we're doing this for the educated crowd, and if you don't get it, then it's your problem. As opposed to being like, how do we make sure that everybody in this audience is really going to get this story? And it doesn't always have to be set in modern day, but it does mean that you have to approach it from, let's assume that nobody in this audience understands anything about this, and let's come at it from a loving place and make sure we know what we're saying. And if you do that, everyone will get it.
what you guys are telling me is that Shakespeare is supposed to be accessible.
Completely.
All right, well, then screw it. I'm gonna do a Shakespeare right now.
And now we have a scene from The Tempest. We have two trained Shakespearean actors who are performing off book. And then we have Aaron, who told me he read The Tempest once in high school. Let's see what happens.
Oh, alas, the storm has come again. My best way is to creep under his gabardine. There is no other shelter hereabouts. Misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. I will here shroud till the dregs of the storm be past.
Oh, man, that Tempest. Whoa.
Do not torment me. Oh.
Oh, no, you're not the Tempest. The storm's the Tempest. You are a blanket?
Some spirit torments me.
Oh, no, hey, no. I'm a dude. My name is Stefano, I think. Yeah, I mean you no harm.
Oh,
What's up?
hurts me little yet, but thou wilt anon. I know it by thy trembling prosper works on me.
I got some of those words.
I should know that voice.
Oh, hey.
Should be. But he's drowned and these are devils. Oh, defend me.
What? No, I didn't drown. I boogie boarded from the ship to this island?
Stefano?
Yeah.
Stefano?
Trinculo, right?
Art thou living, Stefano? Oh, Stefano, two Neapolitans escaped.
We did it!
Oh.
Oh, this is the first time they've hugged me. I guess our friendship kind of went deeper now.
I took him to be killed with a thunderstroke. But art thou not drowned,
Nope.
Stefano? Oh, I hope now thou art not drowned.
Suck it, Tempest! I'm still here!
Is the storm o'erblown? I hid me under the dead mooncalf's gabardine for fear of the storm.
Well, yeah, storms are scary.
These be fine things, if they be not sprites. Oh, that's a brave god, and there's celestial liquor. I will kneel to him.
No, don't kneel to me. That makes this a weird power dynamic that I was not prepared for. Our boat sank, and
I swam ashore like a duck. I can swim like a duck, I'll be sworn.
that's so good. Ducks also fly, so maybe next time try that.
Art thou not dropped from heaven?
That they're hitting on me, right? I'm flattered, but that's not.
Thou wert in the moon. I have seen thee in her. My mistress has showed me thee and thy dog and thy bush.
I'm so glad your mistress showed you her bush. That sounds like something great that's going on for you.
By this good light, this is a very shallow monster.
Well, okay.
I have feared of him, a very weak monster. The man in the moon, a most poor, credulous monster.
Hey, can I talk to you for a second?
Well-drawn monster, in good sooth.
No, hey, they might be eccentric. Don't fucking call someone a monster. That's so rude.
I'll swear thee myself a true subject. I'll kiss thy feet.
Do not. I'm so good, but thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry about it. We've been through a lot recently. I don't know if you saw. There was a tempest. It was bad.
By this light, a most perfidious and drunken monster.
Whoa!
When his god's asleep, he'll rob his bottle.
Dude, take a chill pill. You are coming off way aggro right now, and it's not appreciated on any front. Are you okay? Because that was mean.
I'll fish for thee. I'll make sure thee has enough wood. I won't carry wood for my old master.
You do not need to give me wood.
I'll follow thee instead, thou wondrous man.
I shall laugh myself to death at this puppy-headed monster, a most scurvy monster.
Okay, you two need to work this out right now, because you're being mean and you're being way weird horny.
I pray thee, let me show you where the fish grow, and I, with my long nails, will dig thee pig nuts and show thee a jay's nest and instruct thee how to snare a marmoset and show thee clustering filberts. Wilt thou come with me?
This fucking guy. Oh, thank God.
A most ridiculous monster to make a wonder of a poor drunkard.
Farewell, master!
We're stranded here, so maybe not be really condescending to the person who's trying to fish for us and I guess give us feet massages. Thank you. You don't have to go all out, but yeah, showing us where the fish would be, that'd be so good right now.
Bam Caliban! Hey, come with me! Come with me!
Bam Caliban!
Come with me!
Do it. Do it. You're never on board for fun things. Bam Caliban!
Bam, bam.
Aaron, what did you learn today?
I learned that Shakespeare is not as highbrow as I thought. It's not meant to be read. It's meant to be seen. And every academic who is treating it like it's something to dive through text is wrong. And screw you.
Okay, so where did you rank Shakespeare at the start of the show, and where do you rank it now?
At the beginning of this episode, Shakespeare clocked in at a -5. But now, Shakespeare clocks in at a +1.
What?
They convinced me. Honestly, yeah, I guess I'd been judging it too harshly, and most of my exposure to Shakespeare was in reading it and in boring-ass classes, but it's not meant to be read. It's meant to be performed and laughed at and full of sex jokes and silly turns of phrase. That's fun. I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah, let's cheers to that.
That sounds great. Tink. Oh, Daddy's medicine.
Oh yeah, and you too.
Yeah, get the duck. Get Billy Shake's duck. We also want to thank our wonderful Shakespearean actors, Bridget, Randolph, and Maya Murphy. And as always, do your don'ts. That duck's got to drive later, so.
I got to play Lady Anne and Richard III a few times, and I love that
I
play.
directed it, and it was one of my favorite pieces.
Oh.
Richard III. Richard III.
I did an improv show where, a few times.
Richard III